Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our mid-year showcase preparation webinar. We're excited to share some tips and advice for you as you prepare for the showcase, regardless of whether you're doing residency or not here. Before we get started, just a quick couple announcements. We are recording this session so that you can refer to this later. I will send this out later, probably tomorrow for the P4 students. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat function. I will be serving as the moderator at the end and reading out the questions for our presenters. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter. Thank you.
All right, so my name is Marisa Rinehart, and I am the current PGY2 in pharmacotherapy at the University of Maryland Medical Center. All right, so my section and what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this presentation is how to best prepare yourself before the showcase. So we'll go through tips for preparing for not only interacting with the programs, searching through all of the available programs that are out there for you to apply for residency, but also preparing yourself and your space to go through and do interviews and talk to all of the different programs, since it will be virtual this year. So the purpose of the showcase, I want you all to remember the biggest takeaway from this is that it's all for you, and really the whole purpose of this is so that you feel more comfortable with the programs that you're applying to. You get the information that you want out of each and every program that you choose to talk to at the showcase. And the best way to do this is to go into the showcase with a plan. All right, so the first thing to think about is all of the different types of programs that are out there can be really overwhelming. So starting to brainstorm and think about the factors that are important to you as far as what you're looking for in a residency. So I have listed out a bunch of the different things that kind of helps you differentiate between different programs. So the first one being the class size. How much do you care about having a large amount of co-residents versus maybe only one or two co-residents, or even being the sole resident at a specific institution? There's also going to be different types of practice sites. So community versus academic, they have a lot of differences between style types, rounding types, different experiences that you'll see at community that you won't see at academic medical centers, and vice versa. Preceptor types. So that can mean just generally the interaction between preceptors and residents, but also some places have physician preceptors and other places are strictly pharmacist preceptors. So that's one other thing to take into consideration when looking at the different programs. And then if you want a teaching experience or not, so most of the academic medical centers will have some sort of teaching program incorporated into the residency. Other programs allow you to sign up for teaching programs. They may be off-site though. So that's another thing you can look at and talk to those programs further about. Then there are elective rotations. So if you have a specific interest area, especially those of you looking at PGY1 residencies, if you already have an inkling of what you want to do, or if you want to do a second year, you want to make sure that that place has an elective rotation in whatever that specialty is. And then if you know you want to do PGY2 and early commit is something you're thinking about, you want to make sure that where you apply for PGY1 also has a PGY2 program in that specialty. A lot of programs have mentorship programs, so you can always ask about what the structure of those is. And then location, if that's important to you versus if it's not important to you, that'll kind of help you narrow down your list. And then we'll talk further about how to begin the process of narrowing down all of the programs that are out there. All right, so the first thing you need to do is research the programs. And the best way to do this is going to be through the ASHP residency directory. So you can search by program type, subcategory, you can search by state or city if geography is something that's important to you. And these directory pages will give you a brief summary of the residency program itself. Usually will provide you to a link to their website, giving you even more information about the program. And then that brings us to number 2, look for open houses and showcases that occur before midyear. So a lot of programs, since things are virtual this year, will have virtual open houses, or if you're state specific and you are interested in specific residencies in a state, you can go to that state's specific showcase, which always occur before midyear. And then the next step from there is to organize all of this information that you're able to gather from these programs and then develop a list of questions that you're going to ask at midyear after you've done all of your background research. So what I have shared on screen here is an example of the template that I used when I was prepping for midyear. Some people like to use Excel and do all of this in columns. I find Excel difficult to read when there's a lot of different information, so I just created tables in Word. But the categories I had broken down on here were things that were important to me and things I wanted to find out about the programs after going through their website, meeting with them I came from Ohio, so I went to Ohio's residency showcase and was able to gather a bunch of information there before I went to midyear. But the biggest thing is to just find things that are important to you. So specifically for me, I wanted a larger residency class. You see here, I had the number of slots they had for PGY1. I wanted a larger academic medical center, so I had the size of the center here. And then I also wanted teaching, so I had a section where I talked about what type of teaching they offered, went through their staffing requirements and what their vacations were, what all the PGY2 programs the location had, what electives they allowed you to take. So some programs, it varies how many rotations are elective versus how many are built into your schedule. For me specifically, I only looked at institutions that used Epic as their EHR just because that's the system I was most familiar with and I didn't want to learn a new system during residency. And then a bunch of the extra information that I probably wasn't going to be able to find on their website, but things that I wanted to know about for their specific program. So things like what longitudinal projects did they have? What was the interdisciplinary between medicine and pharmacy like at that specific institution? What was a typical clinical rounding experience? Was there the ability to precept API students? How often did the preceptors and the RPDs meet in what we call your RAC meeting with everyone on your residency advisory committee? And then any extra things that their program required. So you can see for this program, I was able to find on their website that residents carried a code pager every 7 weeks for 1 week, and they also had to be on call as an administrator every 7 weeks for 1 week. So this is just an idea for all of you for how to kind of organize all of the information that you're going to be able to find on these programs. All right, and then the next thing to talk about is preparation for when you're actually sitting in your room logged in and talking to all of the different programs. So a little different this year to talk about this because when I participated in midyear, it was in person. So a little bit less focused on dress code, but some specific things I wanted to go over. So there's the picture here on the right going over both for women and men, what to wear and what not to wear. I think the biggest thing for a virtual platform is avoid any low cut tops, any skin tone colored shirts, because on camera it may appear that you're wearing nothing if your shirt is almost the same as your skin tone, especially if there's bad shadows, and then avoid heavy makeup as it can look strange on camera. And then for guys, really simple, just make sure you're wearing a suit jacket or a sport coat, and then a tastefully colored shirt and tie, nothing that's too distracting. And then the biggest thing is lighting. So I have examples here of good lighting versus poor lighting, and then another picture about distractions in the background. So make sure there's no pets around when you're on camera. That's one of the biggest things and can be very distracting with dogs barking and a bunch of noise in the background. And then just make sure you have a space that is very well lit and people are going to be able to see your face. Try to avoid, I know in this picture there's a window behind her, but she probably has a light in front of her illuminating her face, versus this picture down here where all of the light is coming from the back and you can barely see any physical features of the person's face. So try to avoid that when you're on camera as well. All right, and then lastly, to go a little bit more in depth into these external recruitment events, so outside of Midyear, what else can you be doing to prepare for Midyear? So each program should have some form at this point of a virtual open house or Q&A session. You can find information on these by accessing the program specific website, which will be available, and links can be found in the ASHP website, and then social media platforms, so either on Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn, career navigation emails that you may receive discussing different opportunities to meet with programs. You have the ACCP Showcase, which is a national one that occurs before Midyear. And then here in Maryland, we have the MSHP Showcase, which is occurring this week, which is a local one. And then, like I had said earlier, each state should have its own regional showcase, and those aren't limited just to students who are in those states. So even if you're someone who's in Maryland, but you want to do residency in another state, you can always register for those outside state showcases, and then you'll be able to talk to all of the programs there via their showcase.
So hi everyone, my name is Irene and I'm the pediatric pharmacy resident. So I'll be taking the next portion of this presentation with what to do during the showcase itself. So this is a picture of what the showcase usually looks like in a non-virtual setting. So I apologize, you guys won't be able to experience it in this setting, but it may actually be a benefit. As you can see, usually the showcase it's very large. It's a huge conference room. It tends to be very crowded and busy and can honestly be pretty intimidating. I remember going to the showcase as a fourth-year student, and you know, I feel like I did all this preparation ahead of the game and felt like I went in with a plan, but then depending on like the certain booths that I went to go talk to and how busy they were, I kind of had to revise my plan. So maybe the virtual setting would be a little more accommodating in that aspect and won't be quite as intimidating. So this is very important to keep in mind. So the showcase is broken up in 3 different events. So you have one event on Monday and then 2 different separate times, a morning and an evening time on Tuesday. And like Marisa was saying, it's very important to do all your preparation up front because the programs will only be listed, or will only be available to talk to during one of these 3 sessions. So you really don't want to make the mistake that, you know, you thought someone was going to be there and then they actually, you know, were there on Monday and today is Tuesday. And so you miss out on the opportunity to talk to them. So making sure you do the preparation in advance and you have a schedule of like what programs you want to talk to and what day they're actually going to be available. And that should also help you time manage your time. So, you know, if you're talking to, or you're interested in like 5 programs on Monday, but maybe only 2 on Tuesday AM, that kind of will provide you the flexibility to know how you need to navigate your time and navigate the different programs. So one of the big questions is, when do I actually go into the showcase? It's important to keep in mind that it's usually busier in the beginning because that's when everyone kind of stampedes into the showcase, and then it tends to settle out towards the middle and the end. So it's important to budget your time. Again, with all the preparation that you do in advance, you'll know kind of what your schedule is going to look like. So maybe if you're, you know, only have like 2 programs you're interested in talking to during one of the sessions, and you know those are 2 of the larger, like well-known residency programs, then maybe going in towards more the middle or the end might give you more of an opportunity to talk to those programs more in like a one-on-one setting instead of as a big group. So again, if you have a pretty extensive schedule and you're trying to talk to lots of programs, then beginning as early as possible would be the most like useful means of your time. Okay, so this kind of plays into the last slide about, you know, where should you start? So you kind of have your plan initially, and you know, usually the programs that are larger and take more residents or more of those like renowned programs, they're going to be busier, and they honestly can be busy throughout the showcase. So it's important to like budget your time to know, you know, do I want to start with those busier programs? Do I want to circle back to them? You know, with the, again, I haven't been in like the virtual setting for mid-year, so I don't know how easy it is to kind of pop in and out of the different Zoom rooms, but maybe that's an approach you could consider taking, depending on how busy one of the programs may be. You might, you know, take the approach of coming, checking back in with them. But overall, I would say to really focus on the programs that you're interested the most early on in the showcase, so that way you make sure you're getting the opportunity to talk to them, and then, you know, leaving kind of more of your backup options later on in the showcase, just in case you do tend to run out of time. I will say, like, the 3-hour time frame is a very decent amount of time to talk to programs. So, you know, I don't mean to cause any like anxiety and trying to tell you, you know, you have to rush through the showcase. You know, definitely give yourself time to talk to the programs and get your questions fully answered. So what do you do when you actually arrive to the booth, you know, with this being in a virtual setting? So you'll want to wait patiently. From my conversations with the PGY ones last year that participated in like virtual mid-year, they said, you know, some of the programs had just like an open Zoom room where like everyone who was interested was in that room, and it was mostly just like messaging through the chat box, where other programs are very good and like set up separate like Zoom rooms. So you could essentially go in, say like, oh, you know, I'm interested in a PGY1 program, and they would put you in a separate room with like the PGY1, with the current PGY1 resident, or maybe the RPG or something. So, you know, being adaptable and the way the Zoom programs might be set up, depending on which place you're interested in talking to. And then, you know, maintaining good eye contact is especially important, making sure that you look engaged, regardless of like what the setting may be. And then I'm not sure how they'll do the sign-in process, but I know like the majority of programs that I went to, they took my business card. You know, again, we'll be in a virtual setting, so I don't know if they'll just have you like, you know, drop your name or email and like the chat box, or if they'll have some sort of like external link or something. But I do know that it's important to programs to keep track of like, you know, who all comes and talks to them. So making sure if there's a way to leave your name that you're doing so. And then lastly, you know, making sure you're introducing yourself. You don't want to be the person who's kind of, you know, crowding in like in the corner there. So, you know, make sure you kind of have a presence and are getting your questions answered. So I feel like this is a big question about who do you talk to? So like, how important is it that you talk to the current residents versus talking to the RPD? And really, I would say I mostly enjoyed speaking to the residents, because I felt like that was the group that like you're gonna get the most like truthful responses about, and like those are the people, like the position that you want to be in the next year. There was a couple of times where I did talk to the RPD or to preceptors, just based on the fact that like all the residents were, you know, crowded around. And, you know, of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, but honestly, again, like the residents are the ones that have are currently doing what you want to do. So I think they're really the best resource. I will also say, you know, sometimes this comes up because people are concerned, you know, they want to make sure like the RPD remembers them when they go and apply. And honestly, they speak to so many people throughout mid-year that, you know, I don't necessarily think they remember like so-and-so just from so-and-so. So really, again, like obviously try to talk to anyone that you can, but I wouldn't get like too hung up on having to talk to like the program director themselves. And then again, so, you know, being adaptable, I'm not sure what each program will have. They'll have like, you know, like a one-on-one, just like texting, like text box conversation, or if they'll have someone who's like giving general information about the program, but just being flexible with, you know, whoever you can talk to. And then also just kind of saying your interest, because they might be able to like guide you better towards one person or another. So for example, you know, I also did my PGY1 here. So, you know, if there's someone who has like an interest in pediatrics, but they also did their residency at the same institution, then, you know, the people may be able to guide you to like a different person. So even if it's not like the current PGY1 residents, they, you know, just conveying like what your interests are in so they can place you with the correct people. So then we get to the next part of like, I finally got I'm able to like talk to someone, but what do I ask them? And I would say that depends on like if you're talking to the resident versus the preceptor or even the program director. So having kind of a general list of things you want to ask every program, and then also having the specific questions about maybe things you want to clarify because it wasn't as clear on their website. So again, it all continues to tie back with you doing all your preparation work in advance. So questions for the residents, you know, what is like your favorite part of the program? What would you like to change? You know, how's your relationship with your co-residents and support system there? You know, you can even ask them questions about what the interview process was like or what their typical day is like, you know, again, depending on like what rotation they may be on. Your preceptors questions more geared towards them is, you know, maybe about their job role, how they interact with the residents. And in general, just like, you know, I thought this was a really good question. Do you foresee your program undergoing any changes, or have they recently done any changes? Because I feel like that kind of gives you an idea of how well our program's growing and evolving. And then also, are they taking into consideration resident feedback in order to improve? So really, any question that you may have is appropriate as long as you're asking questions that aren't easily answered on the program's website. So you don't really want to ask questions regarding, you know, like how many residents do you take? You know, what rotations do you offer? Things that can be like easily found, you know, are usually just more discouraged. Because again, that ties back into the preparation work that you should have done beforehand. So moving on to etiquette, again, introducing yourself, making sure that, you know, you're actively engaged. This is the second bullet. It's especially important to not interrupt others. So I remember when I was at Midyear, I was part of like one group where like the student that was interested in the program like came in and then just like took over the conversation, asked like the 3 questions they wanted to ask, and then left. And so, you know, of course, I don't know how that was perceived by the residency program, but in my opinion, you know, that just didn't seem like very nice etiquette, just to say in a way. So just being considerate of others, making sure your questions get answered, but also making sure other people get the opportunity to answer theirs. And again, like Midyear should really be about the program. So focusing the conversations about like what the program offers, what opportunities they have. It's not really an opportunity for you to talk about yourself. And the next bullet, again, just goes back to being able to interact in a big group. You know, you may be lucky enough to get more one-on-one time, but if you are in a group setting, then just being respectful of everyone. And then I think what's especially important this year in regards to the virtual setting is making sure you're showing interest. And, you know, that's not just like in the words that you're saying when you're speaking, but also your body language, as that can really convey how much interest you have in a program as well. So you're going to spend a lot of time talking to people. They're going to tell you lots of information. Other students are going to ask very good questions that, you know, you're going to want to remember. So it's definitely okay to jot down some thoughts. You know, you can have just a sheet of paper and write down some things that are important to you, some things that you learn, maybe someone you know, talked to that you really clicked with. And overall, I would say kind of the biggest feel is once you leave a program, like, what was your perception of them? Did you like them? Did you have a good vibe? Do you see yourself here? Because that's the biggest point of Midyear, just interacting with a lot of different places to see what may be a good fit from you. And then I think this is more applicable in like an in-person setting, but just always being important to, you know, if you're around other people, to not write anything negative that others may see. But maybe if you go to anything in person in the future, that's a good point to keep in mind. Okay, so how do you stand out? And the biggest thing is, you know, here it's a big information resource for you to get your questions answered and for you to know more of the programs. It's not necessarily important for you to stand out. And I would say, like I was saying in the beginning, the majority of the time you speak to so many people kind of on our end, we don't always remember everyone. unless it's someone who's maybe trying too hard and who's being, maybe portraying some negative like etiquette concerns or things that make you remember someone. And you don't want to be remembered you don't want to be remembered in a negative connotation. So again, take the opportunities, but you don't need to, try too hard where maybe you're speaking over people or not being as considerate of others. So you went to the showcase, and now how do you approach like afterwards? So just a common courtesy is to write thank you notes. These can obviously be electronic in like today's day and time. And so, to anyone that you spoke to, this is a good opportunity just to thank them for being there and for their time speaking with you. And then it's also a really good opportunity to write any follow-up questions, because it's going to be a very busy day, and the time's going to go by quickly, and you maybe didn't get an opportunity to get all your questions answered, or maybe you didn't, you had more questions that came up later on. So this is also a good time to send follow-up questions. The only thing I would tell you to keep in mind is making sure they're pertinent questions. So again, questions that aren't easily answered on their website, or like, very vague questions that say, tell me about your experience that you've had at this program. You want to make sure they're a little more targeted, because, it's when you ask such a vague question, I feel like it's going to be harder for you to get a response back, because, the response can really be endless. It's a little too open-ended. So again, just making sure you're asking pertinent questions. Okay, so then moving on to what's next, and I'll let Jess take over this next section.
Sounds good. Thanks, Irene. So I'm having webcam problems, but we're going to hope that everything else hangs in there. So I'm Jessica. I'm the current critical care resident here at Maryland. So now you've gone through the showcase and you're through mid-year. So December is a big month with residency prep. So we wanted to just give you guys some pearls on post mid-year. So the biggest thing that you're going to do in December after mid-year is finalize your list of programs. So how Marisa was saying, she had the spreadsheet of kind of what she was looking for in programs. I did something similar. And then from there, I kind of, checked off who I was still interested in, my maybes, to really come up with a list. And I would definitely recommend talking to your mentors, talking to other residents that you know personally, to really get that list, because it's hard to tell just on paper. So as many people as you can talk to, mentors that have friends at programs, there's a lot of connections that you may not even know about. So ask your mentors for sure. Another big thing is due dates and requirements. So I would say in general, most programs are right around Christmas to New Year's, maybe a couple days after January. But in general, they do vary slightly. So I had one that was due maybe December 23rd. That's probably one of the earliest I've heard of, but I would look out for those, especially for your letter writers, because a lot of them may be professors and preceptors who are really busy. So you want to let them know as soon as possible when your letters are due so that they can get them in on time. And then also all of the programs will specify how many letters need to be written and who needs to write them. So I would say from program to program, it can vary slightly. I had some programs that asked for 3, probably up to 4 letters maximum. And some programs will specify if they want 2 preceptors, some may ask for a work advisor, some may ask for faculty members. So some programs are really specific in who they want to write your letters. So I think the best thing to do right now is look at programs that you're interested in, and then who you're thinking about writing your letters to make sure that you will meet the requirements, because you don't want something to sneak up on you last minute and you realize you need a 4th letter that needs to be from a faculty member. So that's something that I would definitely do sooner rather than later. And then also some programs will specifically mention what they want your letter writers to discuss. So there is a pretty general template that's on the website that most programs will follow, and they'll be okay with just accepting that. But I did have some programs specifically that asked for characteristics or other kinds of things that they wanted them to comment on. So I would provide that information to your letter writers. So what I did was I sent out my letter writers. I sent them a document with where I was applying, why I was interested in the program, when it was due, and then what they needed in terms of the letter requirements. And then kind of branching off of that, some programs will also ask for supplemental applications. And once again, this can be very program specific and these can pile up. So each program, if they want a supplemental, will either give you the supplemental in terms of what questions they're asking. So I would just prepare for those and really look on the website when you're applying. I will tell you that on Forecast, it won't like flag you if you're missing one. It's expected that you're kind of like looking at the website and you have the correct number of letter writers and supplemental applications. So that's really important because if they have a supplemental and you don't submit one, that could be a big deal. And then moving on to CVs. So your curriculum vitae, have as many people as you can look it over. I would recommend at least having your mentor kind of go through it line by line, and then have other people who are just going to look at it from a formatting perspective. Since you and your mentor are probably going to look at it a lot, it's good to have a fresh set of eyes. Other people can give you opinions that you might not have gotten before. And one advice that I always give to students is you'll have a lot of different people who will say different things about your CV. Even from institution to institution, I think CV practices are very different. So I would just take everybody's opinions and then really make it your own. So if you like what somebody says and you think that that fits well with your CV, I would go with that. So you don't have to listen to every piece of advice, but really do what works for you in terms of what you want your CV to look like, and especially what you want to highlight. Okay, and then writing your letter of intent. So that's the other really big thing. So really, in terms of your letter of intent, it will need to be personalized to each program. So you'll need to write the RPD's name, address, all of those things, and then also specifically why that program. So the people at that program really want to know why you want to come there, and not just generic kind of answers. They want like specific things about the program that really are drawing you there, because what they want to see if this is a good fit for you. So by telling them why you're interested, they can kind of see if they're the right program for you. And then obviously the big thing in December is going to be forecasts, which we'll talk about on the next few slides. Okay, so the timeline. So forecast, some of you may have already gotten on there already, and that's great. It opened November 3rd. So at least I would go on and register, just check it out. Don't feel like you need to do it all right now, but it is open, and I'll show you some more slides on forecast coming up. And then Irene hit on the virtual residency showcase, which is the 6th and the 7th. So definitely attend that if you can. And then December 31st is the date that you have to register for phase 1 of the match. And then I'll talk about registering from the match versus forecast. It's 2 separate things, but make sure that you get that December 31st deadline. And then January to February would be interviews. We could do a whole presentation on interviews, but just for the sake of this, I will say you could probably start getting, I've gotten offers via phone, email, all kinds of different ways. So just stay near your phone, stay near your email. They can come any time of the day, weekend, night. So check frequently. So I would say beginning/middle of January is when most programs will start interviewing. And then programs will interview anytime into late February, even early March last year. We had some interviews. And then February 14th is when you can start submitting your rank list for phase 1. And you'll see that this is kind of the middle of February. And as I said, you may still be interviewing at this point. So I would just recommend going in the website, making sure that you have it like set up properly, but you don't have to formally submit your rank list until March 4th. So don't feel like the pressure that you need to submit it in February. Wait until you're all done with interviews and then sit down and do your rank list. But make sure that you submit it by March 4th if you want to be enrolled. And then you'll have a very long 2 weeks of waiting, but match day will then be March 16th. And I promise you'll get through it, but it's not an easy 2 weeks. And then once phase 1 comes out, the list of programs for phase 2 will then be available, I think almost the same day. And then phase 2 essentially is programs that still have open spots. So if you don't match in phase 1, there's the option to do phase 2, which plenty of people will do. And then you can start submitting applications. And then about a week later, they will once again submit your rank list. And then phase 2 matches in April 6th. And then phase 2 still not over. If you don't match in phase 2, hang in there. You can still go through the scramble. So April 13th, you'll have a list of programs. And then pretty quickly, you can start submitting applications. So there's 3 kind of separate phases to the rank or the match. So I think that's something that not everybody knows about until you talk about it. So that there are other options if you do not match in phase 1. Okay, so forecast, probably the one thing you guys are wondering about right now as you're trying to navigate it. So forecast is pretty extensive. There's lots of different sections. And some of them are a little repetitive of your CV, but what I will say that you still should fill out all of the sections. They may mirror your CV and you can pretty much use your CV to work off some of the sections, but I would fill it out in its entirety because it will come as like a packet for the programs. We always recommend doing your newest things at the top, so reverse chronological order. And then another part of forecast is going to be your transcripts. So make sure you read into this on forecast. If you guys did undergrad somewhere else, or however you did college before pharmacy, they may ask for your undergraduate transcripts and your pharmacy school transcripts. So make sure you're reading the fine details of what they need from you. And then also the transcripts really should be official. So they'll need to come through like your school's registrar. So you'll have to like submit a form to your university and they'll have to formally send your transcripts. You can't just submit them yourself. And then another caution point that I would say is that I had some programs that required fall transcripts. So initially when I was doing forecasts in November, we didn't have our grades from the last block yet. So most of us, at least from my school, went and submitted again in December. So if a program does specifically say that they want fall transcripts, you may have to submit twice. And then moving on to application fees versus match fees. So forecast is its own separate entity. To apply for forecast, it's $110. And when you pay that $110, it includes your first 4 programs. And then from there, each program that you want to apply to after that is $43. So you need to factor this in when you're thinking about where you're applying. I did some rough math. So if you're thinking of applying to 10 programs, you're going to end up spending at least $500. So just take that into consideration so that you can budget appropriately, especially with how much money you can end up spending your 4th year. And then that also takes into account the match fee. So the National Matching Service really goes through forecast when you're ranking, but it's a whole separate entity. So you have to pay $160 also to register for the match. And you have to be registered with the match before you apply. Okay, some other quick forecast tips. So when you're uploading documents, always use PDFs and then clear document titles. So I made like a separate folder in my computer that had all of my residency stuff. And then I listed some examples of what I titled mine. So I would definitely have your last name so that the programs can quickly pull them and then just make them very clear, especially when you're applying to a lot of programs. You don't want to accidentally upload your Maryland letter of intent to the Hopkins site. So make sure that you're titling these appropriately so that they go to the right programs. And then I will emphasize, please triple check your documents. Programs will be very picky about spelling errors anywhere in your letter of intent. And then institution names, make sure you have that right. Just look off the websites. ASHP websites are very up to date. And then also RPD's names, titles, certifications. So if they're board certified, you want to include all of those different suffixes. So look on the ASHP website. Like I said, that should all be there. And then the great thing about forecasts that I'll highlight is that you're able to select which documents are going to what programs. So you're going to write, if you're applying to 10 programs, you're going to need to write 10 different letter of intents. So you can pick and choose which letters are going to which programs. And the same goes for references. So I'll show you how that looks, but you can ask different people. So if you have a mentor that has a connection to an institution that you want them to get your letter, you can specifically say like, oh, I want her letter to go to this program. And then same with supplemental information. So you're going to write various unique supplemental applications, and you can pick and choose where they go to what programs. And once again, the system in forecast will not flag you for program requirements. It's not listed anywhere in forecast, so you have to just double check with the ASHP residency website. Okay, so for those of you who haven't been on forecast yet, this is what your home screen looks like. The several sections are listed here. So some of them are pretty basic, just your demographics, your educational information. That's where you'll upload your transcripts. And then extracurricular is where it gets pretty close to your CV. So really work off your CV in order to complete some of these sections. And I will say some of them are quite extensive, so make sure you give yourself enough time. And then there'll be a spot to upload your letter of intent, your CV, and then your references, and then supplemental. And then you can see on the right, you can see if something's complete or required or incomplete. So just look at those things and make sure they're all complete before you click the e-submit button at the bottom. And then here you'll see the pharmacy institutions attended. There will be a transcript form that you can print out, or however your institution does it. You'll need to figure out how you're going to get it to your registrar. But ASHP will tell you like where it needs to be sent in order for them to receive it from your school. Okay, I kind of said this screen, but last but not least, click the e-submit button. And then this is the interesting part. So each program, you'll type in one by one where you're applying, and each program will have its own code. And then from here, each program you can type in, I want to upload this CV, I want to upload this letter of intent, and then you specifically choose which references. So there's spots for 4. Some programs will say max 3. So only upload 3 if that's the case. And then you, like I said, you can individualize what references. And then there's a button at the bottom that you can upload the supplementals. And then the other thing that I will tell you guys is you can submit to, say you have a program that's due December 23rd and you need to submit that day. You don't have to have all of your applications and supplementals done and submitted December 23rd. So I submitted some applications December 23rd, and then I went back on, say, New Year's and submitted 7 more. So if you're procrastinating or you're a little bit behind, no worries. You have until the deadline, so you don't have to submit on, say, December 23rd, your earliest deadline. You can submit different programs at different times. And then here, there's a whole section on the match registration. So you can register for the match within forecasts. So make sure when you register for forecasts, just sign up for the match as soon as you remember to do it. That's probably the easiest way, I would say. And then the last section you'll see here, the application status. You'll have your references, and then here's where you can see if your references have submitted yet. So it'll say how many are complete or incomplete. It'll also tell you if your transcripts have been received, and then if your payments have been received. And then it gives you another box of caution that forecast and match are separate services, so please register for both. And it'll tell you in the top corner if you're eligible for the match in the top. Okay, I think I froze. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me.
Oh, sorry. So that's the rest. Yeah, that's all that part. So thank you, guys. That completes the didactic portion of it, but we just want to give it some time for question and answer. If you guys had any burning questions as you're preparing, I know there's a lot of information to give with this one. Please feel free to either raise your hand or to put in the chat function if you have any questions for our presenters. While you guys are thinking of questions or anything like that, I did have one that usually I feel like most students usually have a question about. They're both of the questions are related to the letters of recommendations. The first question is, when do you think is a good time to ask to reach out to ask people for to get a letter of recommendation? I know Jess did a great job of talking about the due dates and everything, but not some. Just wondering when you would ask the letter of references to write their letters.
I would say now is like not too early. I know I asked at the beginning of November, and everyone that I asked really appreciated it because it gave them a lot of time to do mine earlier than the rest of the resident requests were coming in. So I definitely remember sending the emails like the first week of November, and actually got a lot of my letters back before the end of November, just because people usually have like Thanksgiving break to do those letters, and then they're not trying to get them all done during the month of December, which, like Jessica had said, is very busy for everyone involved in residency, preceptors, RPDs, residents included. We're all trying to get stuff done for recruitment. So when the letter requests keep piling up, it gets really hard to sit down and write individualized letters if you're trying to do it all in 1 week. So I would say if you have people in mind right now, at least give them a heads up that you're going to be asking them for a letter, even if you haven't clarified exactly what programs you're interested in. Usually my general format was to send them an email, including my CV and then the types of programs at least that I thought I was going to be applying for, just to give them a general idea. And then I left it as like an open-ended question of, if you have any more questions about where I'm applying that will help you write the letter, please feel free to reach back out.
And I just wanted to add, so I completely agree. So I reached out probably in the beginning of November. My November rotation was actually someone I wanted to write me a letter. So I knew like initially that I wanted to do pediatrics, and that was November was a pediatric rotation. So if you guys are in that similar case where you think you want to ask for a letter for someone like you're currently on rotation with, what I did was at my midpoint, I brought up the idea that well, initially she knew that I wanted to do residency from early on when like I first introduced myself and whatnot. But at my midpoint, you know, I brought up the idea that because I was pursuing like a career in pediatrics, I would like a letter from her. And, you know, we talked about like feedback and like things that I could do to make her comfortable by the end of the rotation, where she'd be willing to write me one. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind, that just because you're currently on a rotation and it's past that kind of beginning of November, that's okay, as long as you kind of put it on their radar and you have those conversations. And I would recommend like bringing it up at your midpoint, just in case, you know, you don't really want to spring this on someone like at the very end at your final evaluation, where, you know, maybe like they would have liked you to do certain things in order to be comfortable writing you that letter. So something else to keep in mind.
To add, I completely agree with everything they said. To add, just from a perspective from like the preceptor, definitely I would appreciate if you set it like a notification earlier rather than later. I've had students email me after mid-year, and it was kind of hard because you're already thinking about like Christmas break and everything like this one here, this one. So your time is very limited, for especially for people who have plans for vacation, something like that with the sir. So the other factor to kind of think about, like some, especially a professor, they usually will get multiple requests for a large recommendation. I remember one year I had like 10, and it was exhausting trying to do 10 large recommendations for different students and so on, and trying to remember with everything. So I know some of the faculty have a limit of how many they're going to write letters for, what that limit might be, 5 or 10 or whatever. So you might want to do it earlier when you're requesting it for a large recommendation, just to make sure that you have those. Don't assume that they're going to say yes, because they may be for a variety of reasons, whatever. So you should just make sure that you give yourself time and have a backup option. So that leads me to my next question for you guys, for the presenters. Before I turn it over to other questions I'm coming in through the chat, who should you ask for large recommendations? I know Jessica talked about this a little bit, but I know that students struggle with, should they ask their employer? Should they get more from the clinical rotations? What would be your advice for that?
I can share, I guess, my strategy was I definitely asked more people than I needed, just in case life things came up and people weren't able to write me. So I had multiple faculty members from my college. I asked multiple people from my job as a clinical intern, and then multiple APPE preceptors. So I think in total I had 9 people who I asked, which some people would say was too many. But personally, it worked out great because I had 2 people who had like life emergencies in the like 2 weeks coming up to the due date for applications, and they weren't able to submit letters of rec. So I would definitely at least have, if you're planning to submit one from each category, unless the program specifies, I think it's best to have someone from school, someone from your job, and then someone from a rotation, so they can speak to 3 different areas of your character. So I would definitely try to have at least 2 from each of those, just in case something comes up where someone isn't able to fill it out, or if someone says that they aren't comfortable writing the letter. But I definitely think I went a little far above and beyond by asking 9 people. So I don't think you need to ask quite that many, just because the most you're ever going to be asked for is 4 on any application.
I will say, just take a very close look at what the requirements are. So I know there was multiple programs that I applied to that specifically said, like, do not want a letter from like a professor or even from like the dean of your school, because, you know, while I agree with what Marisa was saying, that they can speak about different aspects of yourself. Thinking about residency, you know, you're going to a very clinical path. So my approach was to have like 2 from preceptors, and then I did a 3rd from like a varying aspect, kind of depending on like what the requirements were from the specific programs. But I think like one of the reasons that like swayed me to do it that way also was because I worked retail throughout pharmacy school, and I knew, like, you know, a chain pharmacy, like while maybe some of the communication and like, you know, person to person conversations could be applicable to like a residency, I knew like the actual background of the job wasn't going to be as applicable. So I would just say, like, keeping that in mind also, like, you know, how well can people speak about you and how well can they apply it to like what you're trying to obtain.
I think those are great the way the answer. I agree. The only thing I think I was going to add, you can also be strategic in your letters of recommendations. Like if you know there's a specific program that there's a strong tie that a professor or a preceptor has to with this one, you might want to prioritize giving that letter for them, because the connections. Pharmacy is still somewhat of a small world, so it's great to use the connections too as everything. So like if you go for something in Pittsburgh, it could be useful to use someone like me who actually did my training in Pittsburgh, for example, or something like that. Something else to consider when you're thinking about being strategic. But I agree with but what Marisa said about like don't only have only three reference writers just in case that you may need an extra or two. But I completely agree with Irene. I would also check the requirements to make sure that it's very clear what you need to submit for that as well. One of the questions that came through the chat function was, do we know how many people are applying for a program?
Like, I guess, as in, can you see who else is submitting applications? No. You will have no idea when you apply how many other students are applying for that same position. That information is not available to you.
Because of those reasons, like one of the approaches I did when I asked my letter writers, I like emphasized like, would they be able to write me like a strong letter of recommendation for residency? Because again, like St. Deed can probably speak to this, but I believe we get like 200-ish applications to University of Maryland. So, you know, it's a requirement for everyone to have letters of recommendation, but you really want your letters of recommendation to stand out. So, you know, while it's important to use your connections and maybe target preceptors that you think like that's like a experience you want to be in, making sure they can write very strong letters, because otherwise you're not going to stand out and it's not going to help you get an interview in the long term.
Brandon, I'll give you a second. There's another one I'm going to do first before I do yours. Thanks. Saeed, sorry, I just realized there was a question from the chat function. How many places do people usually apply to? Just trying to get an estimate. Yeah.
I personally applied to 10 programs when I did it, which I feel like is kind of a common number, somewhere between 5 and 10. I would say anything more than that can get pretty exhausting when you're trying to fill out all of the different supplementary applications, going through what's required for what program, what isn't required, and then you also have to factor in the cost. So I would say, like, generally at this point, I've done quite a few of these, talked to a lot of residents. I would say like no more than 10, probably, just to keep yourself sane and not stress yourself out that much, because then you have to think about writing a letter of intent for every single program, and those can get pretty tiresome after like even 5 of them. So I was pretty stressed out writing 10 total. So I would say anywhere between 5 and 10. Now, if you're like, know exactly what you want and there's only a few programs, like 2 or 3, there's no harm in only applying to 2 or 3 programs. But I wouldn't apply to like 20 programs or anything just because it's virtual and you don't have to travel. It's still going to be way too tiresome to go through this process for that many programs.
And I will add, you know, I applied to 10 programs also, but making sure you're applying to places where you're realistically like would want to go there. So, you know, don't apply to places just to apply. I will tell you the rare exception. So my friend in pharmacy school only applied to 1 program and she matched there. She was very lucky, and I wouldn't say that's like the standard at all, but she was like geographically limited to the city where she was living for numerous reasons, and she had a very like strong chance of matching there because she had done multiple rotations and whatnot. So, you know, again, like while it's not something I would recommend, again, like don't apply to places, and especially don't rank a place that you do not want to be.
I think the average I've seen somewhere posted was like 10 to 12 applications is what I've seen, but I completely agree with Marisa. I honestly don't know that there's a benefit for you doing more than 10. I mean, if you want to do 12, that's fine, but that's what the average is, just so you know. I think I do want to caution you, because I know you're probably tempted, because this year it's going to be virtual. You'll be tempted to go ahead and do as many as you can because it'll be easier with less travel. You don't have to worry about the travel costs and everything, but it's exhausting. And you have to also think about your own mental state and how you have to put yourself on. You have to be on your A game when you're doing these interviews. So I don't know that you want to exhaust yourself. I mean, this is assuming you get all 10 interviews, which may or may not happen. But this one, what if you do, or get 12 interviews? That's exhausting. These are usually all day interviews. So just keep that in mind. So don't be tempted just because it's virtual that you can just do all these things. It's probably your performance is going to probably be lackluster by the end of it. And what if that's your favorite program? So on. All right, Brandon, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Hey guys, thank you so much for the presentation. That was lovely. So my question is, when we're sending out that, like like you said earlier, like in the first the first week of November, you're sending out places that you're interested in and why to the people that you're requesting a letter of recommendation. So some of the letters of recommendations have specific things that they would like for them to speak about. So does that mean from each person that I'm requesting a letter of rec from, they'll be sending me multiple letters based off schools, or like they're going to send me one for like the stereotypical fill in the blank one for all of those programs that require that, and then they're sending me other ones for like the ones that require specific things to be talked about within each letter?
So I feel like this is a misconception to begin with. They don't actually write a letter per se, and nothing is sent to you. So it's all done through forecasts, and they essentially like will rank you on certain criteria and will write comments in a box. And so what I did, to each of the persons I requested a letter from, I sent them like, just like a Word document. It had like the deadline. It had what I liked about the program, because I thought like if they could interject like, oh, just to make it more personalized, like she's really interested in this aspect of the program, and I think she would be great because of like X, Y, and Z experience that I've had with her. And then I would also like include it on that document, like specific things that they needed to comment about. So I believe like the part where they can comment those additional things that the program is asking is just like a free text box at the bottom. So essentially they can fill out like the template's pretty generic, like, comment, like evaluate and comment on their like time management skills, on their like patient care relationships, it's a couple factors like that. And then that can be pretty general. That I'm assuming, again, I haven't been able to see this aspect from like a letter writer side, but they can probably send those comments to everyone. And then it's just that additional box at the bottom where they can write those like specific comments that the program's asking for.
And then to add to that, and Sandeep, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, since I'm sure you've wrote them. My understanding was it is not great etiquette to like ask people, if you're applying to like 5 or 10 programs, to ask them to write you 10 individualized letters. So we had students from my school who did that, and the feedback was very poor from the people who they had asked to write their letters. So I would definitely take Irene's advice with that setup of they're going to be filling out the same general questions. It's really just in the last box where they have like the opportunity to express anything that didn't come up in the prompts that were already listed for them, where they can include that extra information. But it's not going to be very specific to where it's not applicable to other programs. And if you were like me and you ask multiple people to write you letters, you'll know which people you asked to specifically comment on things that were appropriate for other programs. But you need to keep that straight in your head, because if you are applying to, like, for me, I applied to some general PGY1 programs and also applied to pharmacotherapy programs. So for the people who I asked me to write a letter that was applicable to a PGY1 program and not pharmacotherapy, I had to make sure that I marked that down so that I knew when I was choosing who my letter writers were going to be for what programs. I didn't submit someone who I had asked to like comment, she's interested in this PGY1 program because, and I didn't submit that to a pharmacotherapy program because you can't see anything that they write, and all it comes up is as like their name and then a document attached to it. So there's no way for them to like specify unless you ask them to write multiple different letters, which I'm sure no one wants to sit down and write multiple different ones for multiple different programs. You're just going to see one document attached to one preceptor or faculty's name and just have to remember what you asked them to comment on specifically in their letter.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sorry, that got lost in interpretation when they literally call it a letter. So that actually helps a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You guys mind sticking around for a couple more minutes? There's a couple of other questions. If you guys are okay with that, which is good. The next one was actually similar to what we're talking about. I had a preceptor who asked if forecast the different programs have a required format for a letter of recommendation. Are you aware of any specific requirements formatting? So I think we pretty much answered this one with that part of it here. So just to kind of wrap up to summarize that question, really basically it's a general form that you can use, but some of the programs will ask to make sure that you are addressing certain criteria in the form. So you just have to make sure to look at the form of the requirements from the program and just let your preceptor know. Some of the programs are very specific about, oh, you need to comment on their clinical skills, or you need to comment on their ability to communicate. They decide on which they are prioritizing. So that could make you lose out on that position if you don't get that letter of recommendation that comments specifically on those criteria. Not a lot of programs do that, but there's some that do that. So just make sure that you're looking at all the requirements, and then make sure that you send this out to your preceptors that are going to be reviewing this too as well, so that they have the information they need. So that would be the difference that you might see depending on the program. But the actual form is not going to be different than for any of them. It's a general form that you would do. That there's a bottom box where you can actually upload a letter, a standard letter of recommendation. Anything else you guys add for that one, or is that pretty much good? Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna say is like it to give you like a real world application of what Sandeep said. Like one of the questions asks about your like clinical skills like in practice. So if you ask a faculty member to write you a letter, chances are they're not going to comment on that box, and so you would have lost out on that if that was a requirement from the program. So the people writing your letter have like a minimum amount of boxes they have to fill out, but they do not have to fill every single box out. If you ask them to write you a strong letter, chances are they're going to fill out every single box, but just be aware that like nothing mandates them to comment on every single box. And so if they don't have anything to say about you in that area, probably not best to ask them to write you a letter.
Great point. Thanks. The last question I'm seeing here is, what do the supplemental documents contain?
Ooh. So let me think back. I think I had one program that had a one-page essay that they asked you to write. I had one program that had 4 extended response questions that were not included anywhere in the general application process that they wanted answered. And then I had one program that asked for 2 short answer questions plus a summary of like all of the research activity that I had participated in up until applying for residency. So it can be various different things. They're all going to be different. I will say not a single program that I applied to had the same supplementary information that they were asking. And one of the big things that I wanted to make you guys aware of is if they ask for multiple things, you have to condense it all into one document. You cannot upload multiple documents for supplementary. So one of the programs I was applying to, I panicked the day it was due because I went in and I tried to upload both of my documents and it only allowed me to pick one. So then I had to like reformat them, resave it all as like a combined PDF and make sure that I uploaded the correct one with both the extended answers and the research summary all on one PDF, because that section only allows you to drag one document in. So just don't make that mistake that I did of saving multiple documents, because you can only turn one in. So it has to have all the information they're asking for on it.
I would echo Marissa. I would say mine were very similar, like a lot of extended essay questions. I also had one program that asked for all of my rotations and like extended descriptions of what I was doing on rotations, how many patients I was taking care of, kind of like what disease states, all those kind of things. So look in advance, because some of them can take a long time if it's something like that. So you can spend a whole night doing a supplemental if you get a question like that. So that's another one I got.
Wow. I had heard of what Marisa was talking about. I hadn't heard about that one yet, about like how many patients you were taking care of and everything. So that's interesting.
I do remember doing one of those now. Actually, they sent me like a pre-templated PDF, and it was like you had to fill in all these different sections for each appy rotation that you went on.
Yeah, that's exactly how mine was.
I will also, just as another example, University of Maryland adopted a supplemental application starting last year. It's all multiple choice and everything. It was really, our intent was to try to get a better understanding of beyond the paper of the CV and everything, just kind of get an understanding of your personality, because that's really what it comes down to. Are you a right fit for our culture here and everything? So we do have a quiz, basically, if you will, with this one, and basically just there's no right answer. You're just kind of trying to figure out, we're just trying to get a sense of what your personality is and everything. So that's really what it is. It's not an essay. I think that would be too much for you guys to have to do and everything. But yeah, so you may see those out there, because I think those are becoming more common with the multiple choice as well and everything with this one. But that's what we decided to do at University of Maryland. It won't take more than 30 minutes. There's instructions on our website page if you're applying to the PGY1 program, where you'll get an email after you submit your application, because we can't do it on forecast. So nothing you have to do beforehand. If you submit an application through forecast, you'll automatically get an email from me actually to submit this application and everything. So there's nothing to worry about that. That should be on the website there for guidance. So that's another example of what that would be. Yeah. Any last minute questions before I let the presenters go? Okay, hearing that, you know how to reach us. If you have any questions, I'd kind of go through this one here. I want to thank all three of our speakers here, Irene, Marisa, and Jess. Thank you so much. I appreciate you staying beyond at 7 p.m. I had a feeling we always get questions every year, so I appreciate your time staying on for this one here. Thanks for all the helpful tips. All right. Like I said, I'm recording this, so I'll be sending this out along with the slides too as well. Thanks all. Okay. Have a good night, everyone.